Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/audio.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you email me directly at Opperman Investigations. You guys all know about my time up in Maine, okay? We got a great new author and a great new book out here called The Lewiston Shootings and All-American Tragedy, and that's Lewiston, Maine. And our guest today is Robert Conlin. So, Mr. Robert Conlin, are you there?
I am, Ed. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we get into this book, The Lewiston Shootings, an All-American Tragedy, tell us about yourself. Who is Robert Conlin?
Okay, yeah. Let's see. I'm going to boil it down.
Tough question, right?
64 years down to a couple of years. But, yeah, I was born in Boston, and I moved to Maine 27 years ago after periods elsewhere. I worked in the newspaper business in Massachusetts, and then I ended up in Holland for 7 years working for United Press International and working in magazines. And I came back here and to the States in 97 and then moved up here to Maine in 97. And worked in the newspaper business for a short while and then took a real sharp left turn and ended up becoming a chimney sweep and owning a chimney repair business and then eventually a heating company that I had for 10 years. So that was... Basically, that was to support a family. I had kids, and you know, the newspaper business is not really great for supporting a whole big family. I had a lot of kids, so.
Then you must have had a nanny too, ain't Mary?
Oh well, I didn't have a nanny. Sure, I had a wife, but I didn't have a nanny.
Yeah, Mary Poppins. It's Chimney Sweet Mary Poppins. Anyway.
Oh right. Yeah.
But that's the thing though up in Maine, right? Because they don't have gas heat. They have people burn wood in their fireplaces.
Well, you know, yeah, a lot of people still do. There's still a reliance on that. I mean, I do it. I have a wood stove and burn wood. Not strictly wood. Some people do, but yeah, it's a thing. It's definitely a thing. So it was a good business while I had it, and I eventually morphed into having a retail shop and you know, selling gas and wood and pellet stoves. But it wasn't really my calling, and you know, I really like to write. So eventually, I got back to what I really like to do, and journalism, and I also write some fiction. So I've written, since 2018, I've ghostwritten 4 or 5 books for clients, and then a couple of my own also.
Okay, so the Lewiston shootings, how'd you get interested in that? Were you personally affected by it?
Well, you know, I wasn't personally, in terms of I didn't know any of the victims, but you know, one of the unique things I think about the story is that, and it's probably not unique, I shouldn't say, because I'm sure it happened. The feeling might be similar in other parts of the country when this happens, but it really affected. It felt like everybody in the state of Maine because it had never happened here before, and it, you know, we're in many ways. You know, sort of isolated from that, had been isolated from that kind of that mass tragedy like that. And I think there was really, in the days after the shooting, that, you know, the predominant thought was we thought it would never happen here, and it did. So I felt affected, I think, like everybody in the state did, shocked.
Yeah, I lived in Vegas for October 1st. And the average person has no idea how it just turns your life upside down. You know, we had to keep our kids home from school the next day, and then later on in the week too.
Yeah, it was a huge thing, and it was compounded by the fact that there was a 48-hour manhunt for this guy. So it wasn't just like it was, you know, it was over. It went on, and you know, it was locked down, and a good part of the state was locked down for quite a while. So it was sort of a double-barreled, you know, action in that in that sense. It was really a pretty profound thing here in the state. And I had been to the bowling alley where the first shooting took place in Lewiston, so I was familiar with at least with that facility and a little bit with the city itself. Not a lot. I live about an hour away. So,
well, take us through the shooting. What happened that night?
Well, Robert Card II, 40 years old, is a truck driver, a longtime resident of the state of Maine, a lifelong resident of the state. He lived in a small town about 15 miles east of Lewiston in a very small farming community. His family, he was I think probably fourth or fifth generation farm family from that small town. He had been experiencing a really profound psychotic episode for probably going on at least over a year. And he, his belief was that everybody was calling him a pedophile, and that was a trigger for him, that he thought that the entire world was walking around pointing at him and saying that he was a pedophile. And he voiced that belief to, numerous people over that course of that year. He let people know that he was very angry about that, and that he thought that eventually, first it was just strangers who were doing that, but eventually he thought that, his entire family was doing that, even his own son, who was 18. So he was in the middle of a real psychotic break.
A year-long psychotic break. Did people close to him try and get him help, or even have him involuntarily committed?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's a big part of the story, is that there were so many red flags with him, and there were so many opportunities to stop him before he set out on that evening in October. His family was desperate to get him help. They tried. They contacted the sheriff, first his ex-wife back in May, so six months prior to the shooting. Contacted the sheriff's office, and they made an attempt at trying to find a solution to the problem. But there was no due cause to take him into custody at that point. And the family, let it be known that they wanted to try to just have somebody remove his firearms, because he had 10 to 15 firearms. He was an instructor in the Army Reserve. He was a weapons instructor. So he had trained West Point cadets every year for the previous 10 years in the use of small arms and grenades and machine guns. So he was a very proficient marksman, and they were concerned, and they were trying to get him help, and they reached out to the sheriff's office, but at the same time, they were afraid of him as he was becoming more and more paranoid. His behavior became more and more aggressive, and the family, was tiptoeing around him. They were afraid. They didn't want him to know that they were reaching out to the police. And all the while, the same thing was happening with the Army. And I can circle back to that in a little bit, because I think the main question you asked was what happened. And what happened was he left in the evening of October 25th. He drove to the bowling alley in Lewiston, about 15 miles away, and he was armed with. He had two semi-automatic rifles. One that he brought into the bowling alley, and where he had bowls previously, he was familiar with just in time the bowling alley. And he went in and he shot and killed 8 people inside the bowling alley and wounded numerous others. And then he got into his car and he left, and he drove about 4 miles away to a sports bar called Schemengees. Schemengees, a very kind of a weird spelling name, but it's a very popular sports bar where they have a lot of pool tournaments and cornhole, which is a big thing now, cornhole tournaments. And he had been there in the past also. And he went in there and he shot and killed 10 people and wounded others. 4 of the people that he killed were deaf. It was a deaf cornhole league that played there on Wednesdays, so he shot and killed 4 deaf men and wounded 3 others. And then he left. and he drove out. So he had, at that point, had killed 18 people in the span of 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. Obviously, mass chaos. Like I said, nobody had even. I mean, who can anticipate that something like that would happen? These are people going out on a Wednesday night just to enjoy life. They were going bowling with their friends, and they were going to play cornhole and shoot pool tournaments with their friends. He left massive carnage behind, and he got in his car and he fled. And I think probably. Well, go ahead.
A couple of questions. There must have been survivors at both of these locations, right?
Yeah, there were, yeah.
So did anybody know him and say, hey, man, what are you doing, Robert? Stop.
Well, he was, I think there were a couple of victims that would have known him that were killed at the bowling alley. He had been in the bowling alley, and they had bowled there previously, and actually had an altercation in the bowling alley where that summer, where he thought that they were calling him a pedophile, and he said to his friend there, see, everybody's calling me. Everybody thinks I'm a pedophile. So he was familiar with them. He had actually, I know that he had spoken to a couple of the victims that he shot, not at the time, but he had previous conversations with at least one of them. I think two actually. And so people. And at the sports bar, they recognized him, but he wasn't there enough for them to say, "Oh yeah, we know who that is exactly." It was he looked familiar, and so people had seen him before.
Yeah, because it's a small town. Lewiston is only 37,000 people, and it was a small town when I was there in the 90s. But it's still a small town. It's probably double the population was what it was back in those days. But it's a small town. People know each other.
Yeah, it's it's funny because when you say small town in Maine, we think of, I mean, Lewiston's actually like the third largest city, I think, in the state, and a big city to us, so, but it's, people, people knew him from, even, I mentioned the cornhole tournaments, that's become a real popular sport, and he had played at various tournaments, in other places. And some of the people there that night recognized him. Actually, a couple of them actually believed that they were partners of his in tournaments in the past. Sort of a blind where they choose partners at the event. So they recognized him, but like I said, he wasn't really super well known. But he got in this car after that, and he fled. And of course, nobody knew where he went. And nobody knew who he was. They pulled the footage from the bowling alley, and within probably an hour, it was up on Facebook, and it was pretty clear. And his family saw it, and they contacted the police and said, "We think we know who that is. That's our ex-husband, brother." And his best friend actually saw it, and then he knew, right away he had seen a lot of warning signs. He had actually predicted that he might do a mass shooting a month before to the police and to his Army Reserve unit. He had actually put that in the text. He said, "I'm afraid he's going to snap and do a mass shooting."
So he was an active duty Army Reserve soldier, but did he have an occupation besides that?
He was a truck driver.
Truck driver. You told me that. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So he, fled, and they found his car at 10 o'clock at a boat launch in a town about, probably 10 miles away in Lisbon. And he left it at a boat launch in quite visible location from a main road. And so, the police obviously just swarmed into the boat launch, and he was gone. So they spent the next 46 hours looking for him, tearing the state up, and it was crazy. Helicopters and armored cars and tactical teams all over the region, and it was just, it was pretty wild. Like I said, something that nobody would have ever expected in a million years to see here.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/audio.
Yeah, certainly the Lewiston Police Department isn't prepared for this kind of thing, and I guess they brought in state police, but once again, it's Maine, it's a very small state, they don't have a big crime problem over there, more now than they do when I was involved. So did the FBI come in too, and ATF, those kind of guys?
Oh, yeah. They brought in, all the alphabet soup of, police agencies came in. I think there were 800, at the high point from everywhere. Yeah. So the Maine State Police actually, in the state of Maine, Maine State Police are responsible for all homicide investigations outside of the cities of Portland and Bangor. So they were the lead investigatory agency. But there were, I think I heard there were 200 ATF and FBI here at one point. And they were crawling with helicopters and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, as you tell the story now, I recall this, the whole thing about the boat launch. So where did he go from that boat launch? On another boat? Wasn't it a suicide or something? What happened?
Well, yeah. So therein lies the big, one of the takeaways of the book, and one thing I had to spend a lot of time investigating was, and I walked the route, to see for myself what exactly he would have been doing. But he went from the boat launch. They found him a mile away. They found his body inside of a trailer of a tractor trailer of a recycling plant where he used to work. And there's a trail, there's a bicycle and pedestrian trail that runs along the river, the Androscoggin River, from the boat launch directly to the back of the recycling plant, and a chain link fence, and hop over that. And you can climb into a trailer, which is what he did. He used to drive those trailers, so he was very familiar with the location. And this is one of the big takeaways from the book was they spent 46 hours looking for him, but he was a mile away, and he had another rifle with him, AR-15 with 200 rounds of ammunition, and something that the Maine State Police has never acknowledged and nobody has ever questioned, and I spent a lot of time on it in the book, is why did he go there? And was he there the entire time in that trailer? And I think the answer is yes. And he went there to kill more people because he used to work there, and he had planned the whole thing out. His best friend, who I sat down with and spoke to a number of times, knew him for 18 years and was a fellow Army NCO in his unit, is convinced that he planned to go from the bowling alley to the sports bar and then finally end up at the recycling plant. And the next morning when they came to work, he was going to kill them all because he was convinced that they were the ones who started the whole rumor about him being a pedophile.
Well, I got to tell you, man, with all those resources, those federal resources coming into town, they had to have known his previous employment. They had to have known the distance between that location and the last scene where his car's left. They didn't go right there.
Well, to compound it, that's a great question. And obviously to compound it was, and I'll just start by saying, Maine State Police has never conducted any kind of...
I agree, 100%. Yeah.
A huge, gigantic, enormous. They had all kinds of communication difficulties, just organizing, and So, having said that, and acknowledging that it must have been a chaotic, very difficult thing to control, and they were desperate to find the guy. He had killed 18 people. They knew how lethal he was. They knew he had a thermal scope on his rifle. They knew that he was a trained instructor, a small arms instructor. So they were desperate, but what has been overlooked in all the reports is that they were informed by his brother and his best friend, this Sergeant Sean Hodgson, that they thought that he would go to Maine Recycling. When they asked, "Where do you think he went?" they said he went to Maine Recycling because he hates those people, and that's probably his plan.
Yeah, plus those guys would know the area. If the car is dumped, the truck is dumped there, he would have, you can walk, there's a trail.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's the point of the book was, despite all these massive pushes they have with all these helicopters and tactical teams and everything else, it would have taken some pretty simple police work to figure out that the guy used to work there, his car parked here, the trail goes right to the back of the place. His brother told him just at 2:00 in the morning, so just 7 hours after the shooting, his brother told him that's where he's going, and his friend told him that. So the two people that knew him best, were giving them information that they chose to ignore for some reason. I don't think they chose to ignore it. I think it was just a communication lapse that they've never even discussed. So hard to understand. Thank God that there was a lockdown in place and those employees didn't come to work the next morning. And I think probably one of the most interesting things about that is his decision to go there was that he did work there, and his friend, told me that he did claim that somebody in that place was calling him a pedophile, and he had just gotten some hearing aids, and because he had hearing difficulties. And he was having a huge problem getting those adjusted. They were these new Bluetooth hearing aids that people have. You can buy them over the counter now. You don't need to go to a hearing specialist. And he was having difficulty controlling and getting the volume adjusted on those. And he was overhearing conversations from way far away. But other noises were causing all kinds of distractions, so he would shut them off. And which really, I think, probably led to his paranoia and isolation, that he was seeing people's lips move, but he wasn't hearing anything. But he definitely overheard somebody in that place calling him a pedophile and saying that he was on the sex offender registry. He told his sister that, and she told me that she went on the registry to look to see when he told her that, and she didn't find him. So she told him, no, you're not on the registry. But as it turns out, there was a Robert card on the sex offender. And same exact name. And actually the weird part was that they were about the same age. In fact, they shared, I think Robert Card, the one we're talking about, was April 4th, 1984, and this other guy was like April 3rd, 1983. So I think that that the fact that there was a Robert Card on there, I think, started the whole thing. I think one of the employees in Maine Recycling must have seen him, and then assumed it was Robert Card, that his coworker. And oddly enough, I went through that database and looked, and there were, I think, 12 employees of Maine Recycling that were on that sex offender registry there who are convicted sex offenders. So I think it was a perfect storm of, increasing paranoia and the fact that there was a Robert Card on the registry and his hearing loss and et cetera. You were just cooking inside his head. It was a toxic stew of stuff.
You said he was divorced, too. What about drugs, alcohol, substance abuse, anything like that?
No. In fact, by talking to everybody, including his ex-wife, he didn't do drugs, drank, some beer, but nothing excessive. Although I guess in the last year he started to drink excessively because I think the paranoia was just leading to that. But he wasn't known for that. And but he did, and here's the part that it ultimately gives you a little bit of sympathy for him, is that his brain was analyzed by Boston University, which is a leading laboratory for CTE, brain damage, and TBI, traumatic brain injury. And they found that he had significant traumatic brain injury. That, although they couldn't conclusively say that it was linked to his weapons training, almost assuredly it was. That his training, the West Point cadets every summer in grenades. So there's something called blast over pressure. It's not
right.
It's not the noise of the grenade. It's the pressure wave that's caused concussive wave that shakes the brain. In fact, they just in April bipartisan measure, which is very rare for Washington. There was a bipartisan bill that was passed called the Blast Over Pressure Act that is now mandates that all the Department of Defense, all the armed forces have to give a cognitive test to new recruits so they can have a baseline assessment for their brain health, and then they're going to test them while they're in. Because there's certainly a lot of evidence that shows that the training methods alone are leading to some pretty significant cases of TBI. There were 10 Navy SEALs that committed suicide that had very, very significant TBI. So there's definitely a correlation. It's just, it's hard to say how much. And they're going to be looking at it more, I think. They're going to study his brain even more at Boston University. So, that fact was a solace to the family. It gave them at least a little bit of answer as to why, why their brother, their loved one, did what he did, because he was known. He was known as an upstanding, good, decent human being, a good father, a good family member who just went off the rails.
Now, the cause of his death was self-inflicted?
Yeah, he did shoot himself.
Yeah.
He was probably in that trailer for that entire length of time. He could have, the weird thing was there were cops all around. They had searched the parking lot. It's an overflow parking lot. The Maine State Police, once again, with all due respect, there were some Keystone Cop elements to their manhunt and investigation. That they claim that they didn't know that lot was there, but I drove over to the facility and you can clearly see it from the main road. So, with the name of the Maine Recycling Trailers written on the trailers. So it wasn't thoroughly searched, and he was in one of those trailers. And meanwhile, cops had gone it thinking it was searched. Thoroughly, cops were in there talking to each other, 10 feet away from where he was probably hiding in the trailer. And he could have easily jumped out and ambushed the police if he wanted to.
So was there an internal investigation, any kind of change in policy and training?
Good question. The Maine State Police they issued a 3,000-page, as you probably know as an author, you're like, okay, I'm all done, and then all this new information keeps coming out. Like yesterday, the Army came out with a new report, their own internal investigation. So I had, I had to assimilate all that this morning, and just the book's written. But there's all kinds of new information.
Hey, second part two. Part two.
Yeah.
I'll have it back next month, right? Okay.
Yeah, Maine State Police had a 3,000-page report that they released in June that was heavily redacted. And, one of the hopes is that there are lessons learned, right? I know that the Card family has testified in these public. There's also a commission that was formed by the governor, an independent commission to look into all these things. And they issued an interim report back in April. They haven't come out with a full report yet.
Well, it wasn't that long ago. I was surprised to see this was like in 2023, October 23, so almost 24.
Yeah, it's not even here. Yeah, it's only 9 or 10 months right now, so it's pretty fresh still. And there's new information coming out. A lot of it is redacted. A lot of it, I was surprised. For example, in the book, I take the Army to task, the Army Reserves, because I figured they were going to just just clamp it down, because they didn't release a lot of documents to me. I filed all kinds of FOIA requests, and it would get 100% redacted stuff back, and I thought that they were just covering their own, because of the lawsuits that were definitely pending, and they came out yesterday, and the Army acknowledged that they had some procedural, using quotation marks right now, procedural errors in terms of how they dealt with not getting Robert Card the help that he needed. He actually went to a psychiatric facility in July while they were on training at West Point. he had a meltdown, and he was command directed to go to the psychiatric facility, and he spent 19 days there.
Wow.
And he was released for reasons unknown. He was scheduled to have a hearing in New York before a judge to be involuntarily committed by the private psychiatric hospital that he ended up in. And for some reason, the hearing was canceled, and he was released to his friend, his best friend, who drove from Maine to New York to pick him up. And he told me all kinds of interesting things about his frame of mind on the way back. Card told him that he told him that he threatened to punch another patient, that apparently he had a hit list that he told them about. In the facility, he had punched his knuckles raw, and they were bleeding when he got in the car because he had been rolled up his mattress and was using his mattress as a punching bag. He was clearly not well, and despite that, they let him go. It's the private hospital's not talking. They're just clammed up. I mean, you know how it goes. There's lawsuits coming down the pike, and I know that the Army's report yesterday, they claim that he voluntarily committed to go to the psychiatric hospital, which is not true. And I think they did that because they're aware of the Sutherland Springs case where the Air Force ended up paying $144 million to the families of the victims because they had not flagged the shooter for a number of incidences that required them to report him to the NICS. And the same thing would have occurred here in this case, that the Army would have been responsible for reporting him to the NICS if he had been involuntarily committed, which, they're parsing words right now. He was command directed to go to the hospital, which essentially is you're going because we're telling you you're going.
In 19 days, that's no joke. Yeah, it's not
I'm a captain and you're a sergeant.
Yeah.
You're command directed. That's not being voluntarily committed. That's involuntary. But they're parsing words. And yesterday, lawyers for the plaintiffs said, "Yeah, we're going to, as a result of this report by the Army, we're going to, we're going ahead with a lawsuit." So I imagine there's going to be, and we haven't even discussed the local sheriff's department yet.
Well, before we get to that, real quick question. Now, after they find him in this trailer where he used to work, did his brother and his friend, the sergeant, did they go on TV and say, "Oh my God, of course he was there. We told everybody"?
No, that didn't happen. It was one of those. It was one of those weird things. I didn't even know about it until I started digging into it, and then I eventually had a conversation with. I've been trying to find his best friend for a long time. I finally tracked him down, and he finally agreed to talk. He was afraid of his own exposure, and he had some mental health issues going on. But no, he didn't. They didn't go on TV and say that. And his brother was a 4-tour combat vet. He was in the Rangers, 75th Regiment, and he's, I guess, got a pretty severe case of PTSD and is 100% disability from the VA. He's pretty. I guess he's pretty devastated and pretty shook up and doesn't want to talk about it at all.
Man, one tragedy after another. Just imagine if you did have the same name as a convicted pedophile, sex offender.
I know.
Your name is on that list. It's not you, but that's your name. Small town. How do you dispute that? You can't.
I know it's really weird. In fact, when the news first came out, they were actually using that guy's picture.
I bet.
News agencies were taking that picture off the screen and throwing that guy's picture up, and of course that guy had nothing to do with it. But so, things got all mixed up. And, even stranger is that his brother, Robert Card's brother, Ryan Card, there's also a Ryan Card.
Oh, my God.
On sex offender registry, but it's not his brother. So it's just a real weird, strange, and ultimately tragic sort of, I talked to his sister, and his sister said that she searched for him. But what happened? Somebody said to me later on, I wonder if she actually put in, because he was Robert Card II, not a junior, but the second, and to distinguish from his father. And I think what happened was his sister actually put Robert Card II in the search engine on the registry.
Couldn't find
and
it.
Didn't come up with his name. And then went back and said to him, "No, you're not on the registry. This is a mistake." And I just, you have to wonder what would have happened if she actually did see him on the that name on the registry and gone back and said, "Hey, listen, there's an explanation for why this is happening, because people think it's you and it's not you. So, let's, I don't know if that would have changed anything, but it's sad to think about,
We're talking to Robert Conlin. He's the author of the book, The Lewiston Shootings, an All-American Tragedy. You can find Robert Conlin Jr. on Facebook if you just Google him there. The book's being put out by Wild Blue Press, so you can find the book there too as well if you don't want to go to Amazon. Just it's not even, ink's not even dry. It's coming out July 30th. Keep an eye out for this book. You can pre-order, of course. A couple of questions before we get into the thing about the sheriffs you want to tell me.
Yeah.
They got this thing. I'm not all that familiar with it. I've been keeping up with it, called the red flag law. Like if you see someone, clearly this guy would qualify for that. He was just committed. He's threatening all over the joint. Where they could come in and preemptively take away your weapons for a short period of time until you're evaluated. There's nothing like that in Maine?
No, that's a good question, Ed. No. So Maine has a distilled variation of that called the yellow flag law. Okay. So another color. They came up with that in 2019, and unlike the red flag law, which allows for household members or family members to petition a court, the yellow flag requires somebody to be taken into protective custody by the police, and then have a mental health evaluation and be determined that they are a risk of harm to themselves or others, and then their weapons can be taken away. So this links directly to the sheriff's department. They received a call for a wellness check in September. This is Saginaw County Sheriff's Department, which patrols the town that he lives in, and they received a call from the Army for a wellness check because his best friend had been with him the night before at a casino, and on the way back, Card accused his best friend of calling him a pedophile. The same old thing. At this point, he had been saying it so many times that I think people were sick of it, but he directly accused his friend, and then he punched his friend in the face while he was driving his car, and they almost crashed. And his friend got out and said, "Jesus Christ, this is absurd. This has gotten to the point where I got to tell somebody, So he sent a text to his senior NCO in the Army unit and said, "I'm concerned that he's going to snap and do a mass shooting, and I'm also concerned that he's going to go to the reserve base in Saco and shoot it up because he threatened to do that. So you should lock the gate." They had training coming up that weekend. Don't let him in, change the password, and, I'm concerned. And so the commander of the unit, I guess, was finally concerned enough because his own culpability is very... By the way, the Army did mention there were 3 that were charged with dereliction of duty, and I believe his commanding officer would have been one of them. Anyway, he called the sheriff's office and said, "We want you to do a wellness check on Robert Card." So they sent out a Sergeant Aaron Schofield, a 25-year veteran. He showed up and he knocked on the door. He could hear Card moving around, but he wasn't answering. He was ignoring him. So he decided, well, this is. By that time, he had the information. He knew he was in a psychiatric hospital, 10 or 15 firearms, advanced psychosis. So he decided that, and you can't question his judgment on this. Was he decided that this is dangerous? I need to back off and can't force the issue with this, and come up with a plan B.
Wait, but Robert Conlin, he just committed a battery the night before in a moving vehicle.
Well, exactly.
I can't get him arrested on that.
Exactly. So, there's a question right there was, the Saginaw County Sheriffs has always said, well, we couldn't use the yellow flag law because they don't allow for a warrant. They did not allow at the time for a warrant, for the police to obtain a warrant to take someone into PC. So he couldn't just go in. But he could have gone in if he was going to arrest them for an offense, assault, for example, like you said. But he decided it didn't merit that. So he backed off. He called his patrol supervisor and said, this is the case. And the guy said, yeah, back off. It sounds dangerous. Plan B is, well, here was the plan B for the sheriff's office was to call the family and to ask the family to get it, to remove the guns from him, the 10 to 15 firearms that he had, and left it completely up to them to take care of it. That was the plan. And then Sergeant Schofield left, and he went on vacation the next day. And they didn't discuss it with anybody. They didn't leave it for somebody to follow up with. They didn't leave it to check with the family. He didn't do anything. He just went on vacation. And then he came back 10 days later, and he canceled the BOLO. He canceled the File 6 that the police use to alert other police that somebody is dangerous and be on the lookout for them. He canceled that without even checking to see if anybody had removed his firearms, if there had been any resolution at all. He just closed the case. And, that was the last interaction they had at all with him until the shooting. That same guy was, the night of the shooting ended up going to protect the family because the family, they thought he was going to come and shoot the family. So
sure.
Yeah. So
and just imagine this: you're advising civilians, "Hey, this guy's dangerous. Just hit a guy. He's crazy. You go in there and take his guns." Who's going to do that?
Yeah, I know. Well, that's just it. They were afraid of him at that point. But, and he wasn't even speaking to them at that point. He had cut them off. He had cut off his own son. He had a close relationship with. He was just, at that point was just really far gone, and he wasn't so. Yeah, that was not a plan. And as the commission has pointed out in their interim report, they abdicated their responsibility and they left it up to the family. And the public safety was put at risk by the police not taking any action. And here's the kicker: is that this Sergeant Schofield appeared before that commission and refused to accept any responsibility at all. And he said that when they asked him why he didn't take it seriously that that Card was threatening to shoot people and commit violence, he answered in a public hearing. He said, "Well, I threatened to kill my kid when he doesn't clean his room, but that doesn't mean I'm going to do it." So, not long after that, just a short while later, he announced he was running for sheriff this November. And then he hired a law firm to issue a 20-page rebuttal to the commission's interim report and said that they were trying to scapegoat him. So, I guess at the end of the day, if you can really, if you can't point the finger at one person, but you can certainly say, you've been a law enforcement officer for 25 years and this is how you're going to handle that kind of a case. And then you will not accept any responsibility. And how are you going to learn from that? How do you stop that from happening again if you're not willing to accept some kind of responsibility? So
did they reelect this sheriff?
Well, the current sheriff is actually running again, also, and you have to question his own competence. He didn't have any knowledge of the interaction with Card. I think he was a little bit sort of a hands-off sheriff, and he was a little bit too busy with other stuff and wasn't paying attention. They had all been trained, by the way, extensively in this yellow flag training and dealing with people with, mental health illness. They had extensive training. So it wasn't like they didn't have the training for it.
Yeah, and for the audience, you got to understand, Maine, there's deer running around, there's moose, there's bear, there's all kind. You kind of do need guns. You know what I mean? You kind of need guns up there. Plus, people hunt all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I talk about that. It's it's definitely, there's a gun culture here in the state, and most people are law-abiding, and most people are hunters, and they grow up with that as part of their family heritage, and that's so some of the gun laws have been pretty lax compared to other states.
Sure.
I
guess chop their own wood. But the thing is, too, like I'm looking back to my time in Maine 20 years ago, everyone knew each other. You knew the guy's father, you knew his grandfather, you knew his aunts, you knew his uncle. You know what I mean? So if someone like this was having a problem, the community, I guess, would have a better ability to intervene back in the old days and go in there and take the guns. But I guess now as things grow,
Yeah, things are different right now.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, it's really easy. Once again, I'll stop and just say I have full respect for law enforcement and the difficulty they have, with the prevalence of guns and with mental health issues being what they are. There's a real bad fentanyl problem up here right now. Lewiston's having a terrible summer right now with violence and crime and fentanyl abuse, and the city of Lewiston is really, really having a bad time. So, there's a lot of difficulty. This is not just, it's not Barney Fife and
No, it's totally different now. I agree. I've heard about the Somalians, too. They've imported a bunch of these Somalians, refugees, and that has to be a drain on resources.
Yeah, they have some big city problems, definitely in Lewiston. And the local sheriffs it's not like they don't have to deal with stuff, and I think most of them are undermanned, and so, Sergeant Schofield showed up alone, and he eventually called for backup, but that's not, you can understand the hesitation to go in like that. I can certainly understand it. What's just hard to understand is the lack of follow-up and the lack of interest, the lack of initiative at all. All the conditions were there. It was screaming out for intervention. And
well, let me ask you this, because you got Bernie Sanders up there in Maine, right? No, he's in Vermont.
Yeah.
Okay, I was confused there for a second, right? But what about, like, the VA couldn't make a referral? They just examined the guy.
Well, yes. So he was in the reserves, and that's a whole other, that sort of exacerbated, sort of created a chasm between what could be done and what couldn't be done. The reserves are, I think the average guy is on active duty for 38 days during a year. So they have control over him for those time that he's on active duty. But when he's not on active duty, they cannot force him to take part in mental health evaluations, and they cannot touch his personal weapons. So they do have their own mechanism to offer him mental health, and they did, and they fell down in that respect, and they drew attention to that yesterday. Was that there was some failures in terms of follow-up. Just because they didn't have direct control over him doesn't mean they have to forget about him. And essentially, that's what happened. Was they just sort of washed their hands clean of him and said, "Well, he's not on active duty, so we can't do anything." And then, I think the kicker also is that in his unit, there were a number of law enforcement civilian officers who were also Army Reserve guys. There was a sheriff of the neighboring county who was in his unit who actually personally witnessed his meltdown. So he knew that, he was a danger. And so they had a unique position as Army reservists and also as civilian law enforcement to be able to coordinate some intervention for him. I think that's the hard part. That's the really hard part to understand, is why nobody decided to step up and do more than the minimum to help this guy.
And once again, we've been talking to Robert Conlin. The book is called The Lewiston Shootings, an All-American Tragedy. So, Mr. Conlin, we only got about, I can do some math here. We got about 4 minutes left. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Anything I haven't asked you really want the audience to know?
Yeah, I just ultimately, what's in all this discussion about the post-aftermath is you can't just forget the fact that 18 innocent people, were killed. And it was another mass shooting in the United States. And, it just keeps happening, right? And, hopefully, at the very least, we can't forget that these innocent people it's just a matter of luck, right? You're where you are at any given moment. And here we are in Maine at a bowling alley. And, you're going out to have fun, and and your family is burying you a week later, and then somehow we can't forget that this with all this finger pointing, et cetera, that there were a lot of victims, family members, a lot of kids.
This wasn't that long ago, October 23. Have there been any news reports of, hey, this, because of Robert Card, we've spotted this other guy who was acting crazy. We went in there and took his guns and anything like that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we could, yeah?
Yeah. It's funny. So since that happened, the use of the yellow flag, they enhanced the yellow flag law since then. They actually allow for warrants for PC now. So that's a new bill that was passed. And, yes, there's been a marked increase in the number of cases where they have intervened and used the yellow flag law, whereas prior to that they hadn't done much of that. There were a couple of really interesting cases where I know of one case on an island up in the mid-coast that it seemed like some guy was ready to just shoot up a bunch of people on that island, and he had stashed some guns, and some people saw him, and they, as a result of their awareness of all these issues, the cops came and looked, and they couldn't find them, but these guys kept looking on their own, and 3 days later they discovered a stash of guns hidden under some rocks, and this guy, it appeared, was going to come back and do something bad. So that that has brought some attention, definitely, to some awareness to the issues, and hopefully it opens some eyes, and hopefully people start paying attention and, stop it before it happens again.
Well, great book, because it focuses on the red flags, like you said, what could have been done, instead of sensationalizing all this kind of crap. And just think the irony, if the Robert Card, the pedophile, if he had been in prison or dead, you know what I mean? We wouldn't have this problem to begin with, man, because it would be clear, oh, no, the other guy's in prison. You know what I mean? We let these guys wander around, and it causes problems.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that guy, I'm sure he did his time. He did what, he was to court, and then he ends up on the registry, and, I think I forget how long you have to be on the registry, but
sometimes it's life. Yeah, it depends on your
he did. I mean, the guy did his crime. It's not that guy's fault.
But the thing is, too, man, your average child rapist serves 3.5 years of an 8-year sentence. You know what I mean? These guys are getting away with 3.5 years. But anyway, listen. Next time you come back, we'll get into that topic. How's that, Robert? Okay. Robert Conlin Jr. I can't thank you enough. The book, once again, is The Lewiston Shootings, an all-American tragedy, and it really looks into, hey, what could we have done to prevent this, which is where we need the focus we need to be on.
Right. Thank you, Ed, so much for having me on, man.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.